In my spare time, what I do is I'm the president of this society. What we are is an entity that serves to educate the public about cryonics, and if there's press requests or whatever it is, we also do support for members. So if they call us, they don't know what to do, we certainly help support them and get them in the right direction with regard to the service providers that do exist in the United States. We don't actually do cryonics in Canada yet. We can help with some of the team standby, but we don't do any storage at this point. So I'm going to just try to explain to you first what cryonics is and give you a bit of history. This was such a huge topic, it was really hard to distill this into a 1-hour presentation or a 45-minute presentation. Please ask questions. I'd like to keep this as casual as possible, and I want you guys to enjoy it. So what is cryonics? Basically, we're cooling people. It's done at the point of legal death. We can't do it before because that would kill them and that would be bad. But we have to wait until the person's pronounced dead, and then we cool them to essentially down to the temperature of liquid nitrogen. It's done so that a person beyond the help of today's medicine might be preserved for decades or centuries until future technology can repair not only what ended their life today, but the actual cryonic process. It's viewed as an ambulance. It's not to reach medicine at a distance, but through time. So that's the sort of philosophy behind it. And it's justified by 3 facts that are actually not well known. And I hear a lot on YouTube or on the radio when you speak to scientists who say, well, you can't turn a hamburger back into a cow, and you can't unfreeze someone because they become goo. Well, that's not exactly true, and I'll explain why. These are pictures of 2 of the major service providers, Alcor Life Extension Foundation and the Cryonics Institute. The first fact is that life can be stopped and restarted if its basic structure is preserved. We know this in medicine. We're learning this every day, and we're doing a better job in medicine. We're doing post-arrest hypothermia now in emergency medicine, which does lend to the idea that a person who is clinically dead isn't necessarily irretrievable. And this is a very exciting frontier in medicine right now. Human embryos, as you know, are routinely preserved for years in liquid nitrogen, and yet they still grow and become a person. Human adults who, in certain circumstances, such as in profound hypothermia, can be brought back from death hours after they've stopped breathing, in some cases, not all. And basically what this is teaching us is that life is about the structure and the intact structure of matter in the brain, and it has less to do with the stopping and starting of these biochemical processes. So this gives us some hope that we're on the right track here. Sorry, this mic is not right, please tell me. The second point is that we don't freeze people, we vitrify them, and this is an important point to describe to you. We add chemicals, we add bioprotectants, we add cryoprotectants, which is basically like an antifreeze, to tissue, and we do it in high concentrations. And what this does is it removes about 60% of the water from the body, and it doesn't form ice. And I'll show you some pictures afterwards of the difference between freezing tissue and vitrifying tissue. Basically, we can now vitrify the human brain, and we can do it, and we can take slices of animal human brain, and we can look at it and see that the structures of the synapses and the dendrites are intact and they're not damaged. So that is actually very encouraging. This is an experiment that was done with a vitrified rabbit kidney, and this kidney, the one that you see obviously that's pink and that looks better, was transplanted back into the rabbit, and it functioned for several days. In this case, so these 2 kidneys, one that was frozen and one that was vitrified, were both brought down to 140 degrees Celsius. And with the vitrification and the protection that we offer it, was able to be rewarmed and transplanted back into the animal, and it worked. Obviously not as complex as the brain, but it is progress in the right direction. So again, just to reiterate the point, we don't freeze people. Blood vessels have been vitrified reversibly. Whole kidney, as I described, has been vitrified and reversed. This completely prevents freezing during deep cooling. Instead of freezing, molecules just slow down until they reach a glass transition temperature, which is about 124 degrees Celsius. And then we go beyond that to the temperature of liquid nitrogen, because nitrogen's cheap, it doesn't require a power source to maintain, and it's very cold. Again, if anyone has any questions, just jump in, please. These are just pictures of the difference between frozen tissue and vitrified cells. The third point is that methods for repairing the structure at the molecular level can now be foreseen. This is not something that we cannot imagine how a person can possibly be repaired in the near future. We're working on nanotechnology, we're working on tissue engineering, we're working on ways of replacing organs and of rejuvenating patients at a molecular level. And we're getting there. And in other areas of science, we can see that the future of nanomedicine can theoretically recover any preserved person in which the brain structures are preserved and they're thus encoding memory and personality. So in conclusion, if the survival of the structure means the survival of the person, if cold can preserve essential structure with sufficient fidelity, if foreseeable technology can repair injuries of the preservation process, then it should work. And there's no reason in physics why it shouldn't, even though it is essentially a very difficult engineering problem. And it's a justification that goes stronger with every new advance in preservation technology, so it's not a static science by any means. I mean, any conversation about cryonics, I hear questions about, well, you can't bring back dead people. And I really want to define what we mean by death, because it is an important distinction. And I do this in medicine as well. There are 3 definitions of death that we need to talk about to understand in order to be able to have this conversation. There's clinical death, legal death, and biological death. Clinical death is basically your cardiac arrest. It's a person who stops breathing, who has no heartbeat, has no brain activity. And this used to be complete death before we invented CPR, before we invented drugs that could revive a patient. Every day I bring people back from clinical death at work. So this is not a definite anymore. This is not a switch or a black and white. It's essentially a gray area in which we're coming to understand that death is a process. It's not a moment. And this is why they actually changed the name from death to clinical death, to reflect the possibility of post-arrest resuscitation, because medicine recognized that it certainly isn't a certainty in every case that a person will not be successfully resuscitated when they are in cardiac arrest. At the onset of clinical death, as I described, you lose consciousness, your brain activity stops, your tissue and organs start to shut down, you start to accumulate ischemic injury. And this is the dying process, and this is what we're trying to stop and to put on hold, essentially, with cooling and with cryonics. Legal death is simply a legal term. It means that the doctor has given up. It's variable. It's variable depending on the doctor, depending on their skill set, depending on the knowledge, the tools that they have at the time, depending on their mood that day. And I've seen this at work. You can have a patient that we can work very hard on, and we can spend an hour doing a resuscitation on, and we get that person back. Or you can have another person where the doctor says, well, they're 90, let them go. And that is a reality of modern medicine, to be honest with you. So especially within medical institutions, it's just basically a doctor's declaration. They don't have the knowledge, skill, or ability to resuscitate the patient, so they will just allow them to die and sign off a death certificate, noting the date and time, and then release the body to an authority like a coroner or a funeral director. And it's something to think about. And this is just an example here. You take 3 identical copies of a person. You place them in 3 locations, one in an emergency stretcher or gurney in front of a highly skilled modern medical staff. The second at home, which is 30 minutes from the hospital, with a family member who's a paramedic, and the third in the woods by himself with no phone. Each experienced ventricular fibrillation, which is a lethal cardiac rhythm that is extremely fixable if treated immediately. Equal patient, equal condition, different access to skilled service. Who do you think is going to survive? Cryonics recognize that the patient in the hands of the hospital medical staff have the greatest chances of survival under these circumstances. It's reasonable to project that same thinking into the future, that the expert medical staff at the hospital, not 30 minutes from here, but 30 years from now, will be able to take what was considered lethal today and as a matter of routine repair it and treat it successfully. Cryonics wish to make that opportunity available to them, knowing that the chances are not great for it to succeed, but also knowing that the alternative is just to be put into the ground, and for sure you are not coming back at that point. There is no real downside to this, in our opinion. And a patient who is suitably cryopreserved will remain in that state unchanged for millennia. Once you've reached cryogenic temperatures, very little atomic activity occurs, and a patient can be held in that state for as long as it is required, for as much time to pass as it will be required to come up with the technology to repair them and revive them. And then there's the third definition, which is biological death. That's your cremated patient. That's your patient who's been found at home after 7 days, who no longer has any brain to rescue. It's irreversible death by any technology, and that's what we're trying to prevent. And this is Ralph Merkel. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not. He is a researcher in nanotechnology. He's also an Alcor board member, and I'll tell you what Alcor is in a minute. This is his opinion. A person is dead according to the information theoretic criterion if their memories, their personalities, their hopes, their dreams have been destroyed in that information theoretic sense. That is, if the structure in the brain has been so disrupted it's no longer possible in principle to restore them to an appropriate functional state, then they're gone. If the structures that encode memory and personality are sufficiently intact, that inference of the memory and personality are feasible in principle, and therefore restoration to an appropriate functional state is likewise feasible in principle, then the person is not dead. They're basically in a state of suspended animation. So what is it we're trying to do? We're trying to cool a person. We're trying to prevent them from reaching biological death. We know that clinical death in some cases can be repaired, in some cases it cannot. And we're trying to halt that process, that cascade of chemical changes that destroys human tissue, especially neural tissue, preventing the onset of this information theoretic death. We seek to preserve the delicate, intricate cells and connections of the brain, the connectome, as you've heard probably recently being discussed. And a person in cryonic suspension has all the time in the world to wait for knowledge to catch up, to be able to reach a point where they can be repaired and rejuvenated and reunited with the world. These are the existing cryonics providers. Any questions so far? Go ahead.
How has it changed since it was first founded? Like, how has the process changed?
Well, they used to do straight freeze back in when they first started. This goes back to the early 60s. And they've come up with chemicals and with processes to be able to take more and more tissue and create a glass-like vitrified state with it so that it's not damaged by ice. And that's part of the technology that they're working on. Hi.
So since this was, like, the first one was founded in the 70s, it's been 40 years. Has anyone from then been successfully rejuvenated?
No. No, we need a mature medical nanotechnology to be able to repair anybody in this state, and we know that. And we don't promise anything less. You know, we don't even know that people are going to be revived. We're hoping, and we are extrapolating based on what we know about the trajectory of medicine today. But nobody's been revived yet. Anyone else?
When does someone decide that they want to go through this process?
As early as possible. There are a lot of legal documents, and there are financial arrangements to be made. And the earlier you plan for this, you tell your family about it so that they're not shocked at the last minute, the more successful your preservation will be. So basically, people sign up, and you can choose and I'll explain to you a little bit about each of the two main organizations. I won't go into great detail about the last three because I don't know a lot about them, to be honest, yet. But I know the first two quite intimately, so I can discuss those a little bit with you. This guy on the left, Robert Edinger, he thought up cryonics in the first place, and I'll give you just a blurb about that. And Dr. James Bedford was the first frozen man. And kind of tongue-in-cheek, we have Bedford Day every year to celebrate that, because there's a lot of atheism within the cryonics community, so we don't have a lot of holidays that we can hang out with together. So there is Bedford Day. But he was the first man to be cryopreserved way back in 67. This is actually something interesting that I found a while back, and it was a letter written by Benjamin Franklin, where you can read it yourself, but it states that he wishes he could be preserved in a cask of Madeira so he can see the future, and he knows that medical technology is not quite what it should be at that point, at his point, and he laments about that to his friend Jacques de Berg in 1773. So I can also, if anybody's interested, I can email you this entire PowerPoint. So if there are certain references or links that you want to look at, I'd be more than happy to share them with you. Robert Edinger was born in 1918. And then at age 12, he read a story called Jameson's Satellite. It appeared in the 1931 issue of Amazing Stories. And you've probably read about these pulp fiction stories, science fiction stories in the mid-20th century. And one story that he read, it showed a man that was catapulted into orbit, and he was dead, and he was preserved at near absolute zero, and he outlasted humanity. He survived the extinction of man, and he was discovered by some mechanical men who revived him and became one of their company. The story is silly, obviously, but it gave him an idea, and it certainly became obvious to him that the main point of the idea was that why do we need to wait for aliens to do this? Why can't we do this for each other? And why can't we endeavor to extend the lives of our own people? So he was in hospital in 1947. He went to World War II, and he had some wounds. And while he was sitting in the hospital, he wrote a short story himself discussing the concept of cryopreservation as a pathway to future medical technology. And it was called The Penultimate Trump. It was published in March 1948, and it was read over first by Isaac Asimov, who approved it, who agreed that it was sound in its logic, and he liked the story, so he allowed it to be published. It became a sensation. He went on the Johnny Carson show, and for a little while, cryonics was all the rage. And they formed the societies, the Cryonics Society of California and Michigan in 1966, and then his mother was the first patient of CI that was frozen in 1977. So this goes back a long time. Now, James Bedford, that's a picture of him in his doer there. He was the first patient to become cryopreserved at the age of 73. He was a professor of psychology. And there was 2 false starts before him. I actually learned this yesterday doing this research. There were 2 people that meant to be the first one, and yet, for some reason, it didn't happen for them. Either family intervention or nobody knew what they were doing, so they weren't frozen. This is a question I get a lot. How much does it cost? Because people will often say, well, this is for rich people. This is silly. This is not something that could ever be within my world. It depends. The 2 main companies that I discussed, Alcor and CI, have very different pricing structures, and the cost depends. This is really an industry that hasn't fully developed yet, and therefore it depends on geography, where you live, how far you are from these institutions, how much help do you need, and which company you decide to opt for as to how much it will end up costing you. The good news is that most people can pay for life insurance. So if you're 25, if you're 30, and you're reasonably healthy, and you get a regular insurance policy for $200,000, you're more than covered. That's the price for Alcor. This is the organization in Arizona. They do the whole shebang. They do a 200,000 whole body cryopreservation, where the 25,000 is to CMS fund. CMS is basically the member standby, where they'll come to your bedside when you're dying and they'll wait, because essentially the most important thing is to initiate the cooling process at the moment of legal death. You do not want to wait for the person to accumulate ischemic damage. You want to get to them as soon as you can. The $80,000 for neurocriopreservation is if you've just decided that science is going to be so glorious in the future that they'll make you a new body, you don't need yours anymore, then you just freeze your head. That's for people, I mean, it depends. Some people choose that option because of the price. Some people choose it because they have a lot of faith in science and they have a lot of faith in the ability of medicine to be able to repair them and just to clone them or create a new body for them. And they're doing research on that right now. That's not far-fetched. They're printing organs in Massachusetts as we speak. So that isn't something that is so strange that one's nose should be turned up at it. The other organization, which was founded by Robert Ettinger, is the Cryonics Institute. And they have a very different price structure, as you can see. Their most expensive cryopreservation is $35,000, and they haven't changed their price since they've opened their doors in the mid-70s. The difference is they don't offer standby. You either arrange it yourself or you contract with another organization. And that would be Suspended Animation, that third name on the list. Suspended Animation exists to just do the standby and the transportation and the preparation. They don't do storage. So a combined cost with them and CI would be what you see here. Still less than the other organization, but I mean, choosing one organization over the other is a complicated endeavor. It's not just about the money. I hope you all recognize this, who this is. Unless I'm really old. It's Han Solo. Anyways, I'm going to stop here for a moment and just ask if anyone has any questions before we get into the ethics, the muddy ethics of this.
Is there a guarantee that they'll keep you until there's like science for it? Like, or is
There are
there
no
like enough demand for it that like at some point they're gonna say, well, it's been a couple hundred years?
There are no guarantees. There is the effort to keep you as long as they can. They create a patient care fund with part of the money that you give them. It sits in trust where they draw from it the interest to help maintain the building, to help maintain the cost of running the organization. So what you would find if you call one of them is that they're incredibly strict when it comes to your contracts. They want to make sure that you're not somebody who's going to promise to pay and not pay. Or you really need to be sure that this is what you want. You either pay with life insurance or you pay with money, it doesn't matter. But this is why I mentioned to you about having preparation ahead of time. They really don't like last minute cases because those are dangerous. Those put the company at risk for litigation, which costs money. But they do have a separate fund. Both organizations have a separate fund that is extremely well funded, that whose intention it is to maintain the building, the personnel, the work, and just as long as it needs to be maintained. So. Yes, sir.
How long do you think it's sustainable for, given that once a patient is preserved, you don't get any income from them, but it will eventually build up and cost you more to keep these people? So how long is it sustainable for before you run out of space or run out of money?
The good thing is it doesn't cost much to maintain them. The most expensive part of the cryopreservation is fetching the person, getting them into that cryopreserved state. That work, all that legwork is well documented and it is costly. The maintenance is basically topping up the dewars that they're stored in with liquid nitrogen. It doesn't even require electricity. It works essentially on the temperature of the gas in a compressed liquid state. So the maintenance fees for these patients is very low. And one other good thing that I've seen, I've been involved with cryonics since about 2001. One other good thing that I've seen is that there are more and more people becoming interested in it as they learn about it through the internet, through projections of other science conversations that are had. When you talk about Ken Hayworth, and you speak of his work, and you speak of work in robotics and in uploading and in tissue engineering. it makes people more interested in cryonics because it doesn't seem like such a strange idea after all. So that helps to answer that question by saying that we're growing, and as a result of that growth, hopefully, I mean, I cannot promise you the world, but hopefully the money will be there for as long as needed. Yes.
How many people have been preserved like this? Like that?
About 2,000 altogether.
200?
Am I getting the numbers from the membership?
We're talking members or patients?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Membership's about 2,000 between the two companies, and I would say cryopreserved patients is about 200, and I know it's about 10% of the membership at this point, about 200 people between those two main organizations. Yes?
Where do you get the funds? Like, is it government funding or private?
No, we get funding through donations, we get funding, like us ourselves, we don't get funding. We operate simply on the work. But the funding for this comes from people that sign up, and let me show you here. Like they'll take, if you look at the 200,000 whole body cost, there's the patient care trust where part of that money is allocated to. There's the cryopreservation itself, which costs 60,000, and then there's the actual member standby fund, which is 25. So all of the what ifs that may happen from the moment that we realize that the patient is in trouble to the moment that they're pronounced and taken to Alcor, in this case, they're allocating $25,000 for. 60,000 is for the actual process of cryopreserving them, and then the rest, that patient care trust, is in there to protect long-term storage, long-term maintenance, etc. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
Where or how are the storage chambers stored, I guess? But they protect against something that you can't really control, like a fire or a natural disaster or that sort of thing?
The two companies have chosen their locations very well. They try to mitigate as much natural disaster as possible. Alcor used to exist in California. That's not a good place to be. So they moved to Arizona, where tectonically they are much more stable. Fires, I mean, you keep a building up to code and you do your best to prevent fires. It's not in an area, I think, that is prone to bushfire, as far as I understand it. Crime, I mean, they have their own, they do protect their patients. The patients are stored in dewars. Dewars look like these great big thermoses. I showed it to you sort of in the beginning, albeit very quickly. I'm sorry. Here. And these dewars hold about 6 patients each. They're stored upside down for the sole purpose that if there is a boil-off of the liquid nitrogen, the last thing to thaw would be the head. I know it sounds unusual, but there is a reason for it, and the reason is that if there's ever a disaster where there's an interruption in the supply of nitrogen, they can go months actually without being topped up. So that's why they have that. Anything else? Yes, sir.
This might be a strange question, but the people who decide to go in this state, do they only go into this as an absolute last resort, or would they maybe consider in the future, if they were in a degenerative condition, to maybe go into the freezing precisely to stop the degenerative conditions that maybe they would be revived later?
The problem with that is a law. That would be murder.
Okay.
See, and I mean, if you can speak to some idealists within the cryonics community that say that would be a great idea. I have such faith in it that it's going to work, that, I have brain cancer, I have a tumor that's going to destroy my identity, it's going to destroy who I am. I'd like to stop that process from happening now, right? That we can't do that, unfortunately, because that would be interrupting their life, and that would be, in this case, murder, because we can't prove that we can bring them back yet. There is some hope with that. We're in states that are allowing euthanasia of terminally ill patients. There is some hope, But I think it's a little early for me to even talk about with any merit. I don't know. But you have to wait till the person, and you can't interfere. I mean, we were very careful with our processes that we're not seen to interfere in any way with the patient until they naturally die, or go into clinical cardiac arrest and legal death. And then only at that point do we take over. So we don't want anyone to interpret that we are hastening someone's death, because a lot of people feel very strange about this, of course. This is something that's very countercultural and very counter-religious for many people. And it's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. So if you have a family member that says, hey, this is what I want, it's a very good thing to have this conversation way ahead of time if possible, so that you can prepare them for what your wishes are. So there aren't shocks when they're already upset because you just died,
Just to follow up on this question, because I think it's a great question. Like, do you have any regulation in place to avoid, to reject bodies from some of the members that kill themselves to go inside it?
No. I mean, I think it's taken on a case-by-case merit. If a patient commits suicide or dies under unusual circumstances, the coroner will get involved before we even get involved. And there, within that scope lies the regulations of protecting the public, or we would be very, very reluctant to take on a case like that if we weren't sure that what we were doing was legal. So, yes.
Of the 200 patients who are currently in
Cryostasis.
what's the average age of them?
Most of them are older, of course, because most people die when they're older, but we have children in there too, and teenagers. Kim Susie, a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, Kim had a terminal brain cancer. She went on Reddit, and she didn't have the money for Cryonics, and she actually got the Redditors to help her sponsor her cryopreservation. So that was a big deal 2 Januaries ago. She was 21. She was a university student. But I mean, obviously, it goes with the statistics of death. Who's most likely to pass away? Who's most likely to need cryonic services? But I mean, in my work, I see people die every day. Yes.
You were saying you're gonna basically they're waiting until medicine hits a certain point. But at what point, is there a committee that kind of decides it for the different companies, that will be in place to kind of be okay, we think medicine is at this point now that we can.
I think what it's going to take, it's going to be on a first in, last out situation, where the person with the best cryopreservation is going to probably be revived first. So poor James Bedford will probably be the last guy out, because he was cryopreserved with the crudest technology. There's also parts like wording in our contracts that asks us, how far do you want us to take this? Do you only want us to cryopreserve you if we get to you within X number of hours of your death, or do you want us to give up after a certain point? Let's say they find you 2 days later, or let's say the coroner does an autopsy, or however that works out. Do you want us to keep to pursue this, or give the money back to your family? And so you can make choices within your own contract about how far you're willing to go. There are people that even if they find a part of them from an airplane, they want to try no matter what, because they don't really see a downside to it. But then there's other people that are very choosy about wanting cryopreservation only if it can be done under the most ideal circumstances. I'm going to skip ahead just to these ethics, because there's only 3 in here, and they're probably the most common ones that I get, and I admit that they're not all science related, but they are things that touch to people's cores. One argument that I get is about unfixed lifespans. I get a lot of, not hatred, but a lot of vitriol about this one. How dare I try to mess with the natural human lifespan? And I look at this with a different moral argument. And the moral argument that I basically have for it is what it says here. it's rooted in human dignity and human life. I don't know when I'm going to die. I'd like to be here as long as I can and do everything within my power to do so. If this is a tool that will allow me to do that, on top of trying to take care of myself, on top of trying to take advantage of medical breakthroughs, then there's my plan B right there. You know, but there are other people that don't want that, and I was reading this yesterday, and I really wanted to touch upon this because this is a hot topic within the cryonics community. How we are robbing people of the human dignity of a funeral. Well, all I'm offering here is a choice to the people that want it. I think that people have the right to choose how they leave this earth and how they live on this earth. And I do, in that sense, support euthanasia under certain circumstances if a person's suffering is intolerable and they can decide how their life, like they have enough cognition left to make that decision for themselves. I respect the choice of individuals. And I want to emphasize this argument within that one, that human life has dignity and it has worth. And I mean, medicine recognizes it because we try to cure disease. We don't just decide which diseases we're going to cure for the most part. Religion recognizes it because we pray for people. We hope that people are going to get better. We don't. Religious people tend not to support suicide. Law recognizes it by making murder illegal. So law, religion, and medicine all recognize the worth of human life, and we're simply doing the same. And we're simply saying that if there is a choice to interrupt this event and prevent it from becoming a death, we will try to do that if we can. The operating principles, no one should die against their will. Are we going to live forever? Well, it's a really long time. You know, I don't think anyone can have that conversation in a serious manner. I think what we can have is, I'd like to stay here as long as I can. And if you give me a tool and I think it might work, I'm going to try it. Because the downside of not trying it is what we've talked about, going into the ground or cremated. And then this goes into ageism, and this is another sticky quandary. People have a right to life. Again, same thing. If I am 80 and I am diagnosed with a terrible disease, it's just going to be as devastating to me as if I was diagnosed with it at 40, because I value my life and I want to live it. I think, and this is from my own experience in my work as a nurse, people don't fear death, they fear suffering. They fear loss and they fear suffering. And if you could offer them a life that was healthy, and you could offer them a life that was free of suffering, would they want to wake up and live another day tomorrow? Probably. And this is the position from which I stand and from which I advocate for cryonics. And of course, serious illness can affect anybody. Oh, this is the soul question. This one's a hard one for me because I don't share the belief in the soul at this point, but many people do. And the argument, and this is an argument that was created by people who are theologians, that we've recognized that cardiac arrest is not a state of death, that resuscitation can bring people back from that state, and it looks like that person is the same person that that went in, came out. So we think that if we believe that the soul exists in that body, then that soul didn't leave. The soul knew somehow that the person wasn't going to die. And so we can rephrase the question, does the soul depart at cardiac arrest rather than does the soul depart when you freeze them? And the answer is certainly no, even if a doctor declares death, because legal death, again, is a statement that further resuscitation measures are not appropriate. If there is a soul and it departs, it must be at a point in which resuscitation is impossible. And if the soul is there, and if it's eternal, it's going to know the difference between future impossibility and present. So our correct theological status, we believe, is that the patient is in a coma, not death, and the soul remains. I get this one a lot. Aren't you afraid of death? Well, I am. I mean, this is what prevents me from walking in front of trucks. This is what prevents me from taking up certain activities like scuba diving. That didn't work out very well because I was too afraid to die under the water. But I don't think that that's an irrational thing. I think that, I mean, you've got words here from a biologist in the last paragraph that are actually much more eloquent than mine. But it's rational desire to continue living. And I don't think that there's any shame in that. I mean, here's a few concepts for further reading. And the last one I just wanted to outline, the scientist's open letter on cryonics, is actually a letter, and I tried to put it on these slides, but it was too long. There were 65 entries in there, PhDs. We have one in the audience here, Daniel, how do you say your last name?
Crevier.
Crevier? Okay, so he is one of our PhDs on our list, and I thank you for that. And it's basically advocating that cryonics is a viable idea, and it doesn't break the laws of physics, and it should be something that should be allowed by people who want it. And this one, I don't know if anyone remembers this story of Ted Williams. He died in 2002. He was an amazing baseball player, and his son chose to have him cryopreserved. There was a humongous mess debate on Sports Illustrated about that, but ultimately he's still there. He's still at Alcor, and his son actually passed away a year or two later, and he's been cryopreserved as well. So maybe the two of them will be reunited in the future. I don't know. That's it. Any questions? I know there's so many things to talk. Like there's so many angles that I could talk to you about with this, but I don't have enough time. And so if you want to do more reading, if you ever want to email me or ask me a question, I'd be more than happy to point you in the right direction. Questions?